I just want to tell you all thank you so much for participating in our event today. Just for those of you who perhaps have not, didn't attend earlier this morning, or who've not participated in the Writers' Conference before, I just thought I'll give a really quick background because I want Kim to have time to do her presentation. That's what we're here to listen to. But the Sierra Writers' Conference has been a collaboration between Sierra College Press, and Sierra Writers over the years. Sierra Writers was a writers group in Nevada County that then had to close up shop. And since they closed up shop, Sierra College Press has taken over providing some of the writing activities for our community. And that's what these mid-year events are. We're very, very proud that we can present to our community, our students, and to our staff, these amazing workshops with amazing presenters like Kim Bateman. So another one of the beautiful things about the mid-year event is that it's tied to our main event, which will occur in February 10th through 12th. And it's tied in theme, which is Stories Matter, Reimagining Past and Future. The Sierra Writers Conference and Sierra College Press are funded through donations from our wonderful different departments on our campus, but also from the community as well. So if you feel compelled to do so, we would love a donation to Sierra College Press. You do that through the Sierra College Foundation, and under their donation page, just donate now to Sierra College Press. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Kim Bateman. She is a storyteller, a psychologist, a psychology professor, and an award-winning author. Her research interests include bereavement, humor, and the effects of technology on relationship. And don't we all have stories to tell about that right now? She has delivered many notable keynote addresses, including There's a Fox Under My Bed and Pixie Dust in My Hair at the Developmental Psychology Conference, The Psychology of Humor at the Women's Wellness Conference, and College Culture through the Song Lyrics of Bob Marley at the Community College League of California Conference. She presented a TEDx talk called Singing Over the Bones and is the author of a book called Crossing the Owl's Bridge, a guide for grieving people who still love, which won a New Generation Indie Book Award for nonfiction. She also contributed a chapter, Symbol Making and Bereavement, to a compilation entitled And Death Shall Have Dominion, and writes a death dialogue blog. Dr. Bateman also serves as an executive dean of the Tahoe Truckee campus of Sierra College. And so please welcome Dr. Kim Bateman.
I'm teaching my first in-person class this semester, and at 6 o'clock every Tuesday night, they come shuffling in, kind of like the walking wounded. And I've come to find out, even though I can't see them because their faces are covered with masks, that they're exhausted. I have one student who is working double shifts at our local diner because they're short-staffed. I have another student who is living in her car because Truckee is now a Zoom town. We used to have 300% the national average in terms of real estate prices, and those went up 54% more last year. So there are a lot of local people, working people, who are getting kicked out of their houses because they're worth so much. I also have a student whose father died 3 months ago, and they were not able to do a funeral for him. And then one other student who speaks Spanish, and he is the only liaison between his family and his mom, who's in the hospital. He's also the only vaccinated person. So he is now turned into the liaison between the medical people and his mother. So he's carrying all this weight. So we can see, from these basically brutally broken people, that this is not just a medical crisis, it's also a psychological crisis. In looking at this slide, 1 in 500 Americans have died. So most of us know someone who died or know of someone who died. And so for the next 50 minutes, we're going to be talking about grief. And we're going to be talking about it using some numbers, some student artwork, as well as the wisdom of a Tlingit folk tale. So we're all aware of what it feels like. We all and understand the seriousness of death as something that we grieve over, but there's lots and lots of other things that we can grieve. And these are called ambiguous losses. And they may be something like the lack of social connection, or you're missing your gym class, or you've lost your job, or you can't go to your church services anymore. So could we right now, if you could write in your chat, some of the other things that you feel are ambiguous losses that are not the death of a person necessarily, but the loss of other things during this pandemic? And go ahead and write, and we're all going to be watching those. So I'll just read those out. Freedom to connect deeply with strangers, going to a restaurant, worrying about people dying, returning as a college student, losing direction, not teaching face-to-face, losing boundaries between work and home life, loss of community connection, physical connection, hugs, not being able to visit grandchildren. There are more. Hugs, yes. Knowing who I am in these new spaces, loss of family, not feeling safe. The ability to travel, yes. I have another student who his aunt is dying of COVID in Turkey, and he's unable to travel there because of the restrictions. A movie theater, music. Just gathering outside. And even up here, we lost the ability to even walk in our own woods because all the forests were closed down because of wildfire danger. Touch, personal interaction, smiles, seeing those face to face, all those really, really important things. And as we're kind of comparing these things, I know the death of an actual person compared to losing your Pilates class is a little bit like comparing pancreatic cancer to having an infected sliver in your foot. But let's remember that they all distress us to some extent, and they all fill us. And empathy and compassion are exponential. They're not finite. And we can certainly feel for all those situations. So let's go through some of the feelings we have, if you could read those. And how many of you, and I can see some of you with a raise of your hand, have felt any of these things over the last 18 months on a fairly regular basis? And these are some of the common signs and symptoms of grief. Wow. At our school, we actually have a little app where you have to fill out whether you're fatigued and whether you have a headache. And every day I feel like I have a headache, and it's related to COVID, but it's not because of COVID. It's because of COVID, if you know what I mean. So it's those are some really, really common signs that we are grieving, walking around exhausted, numb. And I have to say, this is what my students look like when they're walking in at 6 o'clock every Tuesday night. But there's also some less evident sort of symptoms. It's interesting because 1 in 3 Americans plans to change jobs post-pandemic. Of course, many people actually lost their jobs. And this, maybe this isn't actually a good thing, but change is often stressful, even if it's for the positive. Sorry, I forgot to give you the warning. There is some strong language on some slides. And also, this is a very, very touchy issue. And so if you need to take care of yourself, please do. The COVID-19, for me, often refers to the 19 pounds that most people I know have gained during the last 18 months. Baking has become a real comfort for many. The other thing is self-destructive behaviors. So it may not be that you can name that you're grieving or that you're missing, but we did a survey of our students on the Sierra College campus in Truckee and found that the drinking was up by about twice what it was pre-pandemic, meaning binge drinking. Another one is a lot more people are smoking pot to kind of numb out or dissociate. And much more seriously, the number of opioid-related overdoses last year skyrocketed. 87,000 Americans died of an opioid overdose last year. And you can see the fentanyl red line going sharply up. This is deaths per 1,000. So the CDC and the Census Bureau have come out with some pretty startling statistics on reports of people feeling anxious or depressed during this time. The yellow bar is pre-pandemic, and you'll see the purple bar is of last December. So the far right purple bar is saying that 42% of Americans report feeling some sort of anxiety or depression, which is an epidemic, I would say. Here is another visualization of that. The top bars are from the UK. The blue bar is pre-COVID, and the orange bar is during COVID. And see on the bottom, we have 42% of Americans reporting some sort of anxiety or depression. And this is good that we're actually naming it. That's the first start. Also very startling is the increase in the number of homicides last year. This is the percentage increase from 2019 to 2020. And I'm not sure what's going on with Seattle, but up 74% since the year before. And this, there are many reasons for this spike, but the one that I'm interested in today is the frustration aggression hypothesis, how when we become frustrated, we tend to be more aggressive with others. So it's obvious that we're having more than a medical crisis, right? So how do we navigate? And one way is to recognize the grief that many of us are feeling. And there are many, many ways to integrate grief. And notice I didn't say get over grief. We just learn to situate it differently so it has less power. Because I really believe that pain is only morbid when we deny it. So I have chosen today one avenue to integrate grief, and that is the wisdom of an ancient folk tale. It's a Tlingit tale called The Image That Came to Life. And these are some of the progression of tasks that people face given this particular folk tale. Now, I actually taught Death and Dying online last semester and the semester before. And in those classes, I had them actually do, number one, name it, and then jump to creative expressions. So they had the task of writing or drawing a picture or creating an art piece about some sort of a feeling they had related to death and dying and grief. And as I'm showing you these images, I'm showing you some of the student images. I wish I could tell you the stories behind, because each one has a story. I will tell you in depth one of the stories later in the presentation. I'm going to use this that art as a springboard for telling you the Tlingit tale. I also really want to give a big shout out to Brendan Gill and Mariana Jimenez, who both helped me immeasurably with this technology of this recording. So I'm going to show you a recording that we did of the story. It's a Tlingit tale called The Image That Comes to Life. And as you're listening to this story, I want you to see how it relates to grief in general, but also your own lives and how you've been feeling during this time. And we will do some breakout sessions right afterwards where we can share, and then we'll come back together.
Long time ago, in a place far, far away, but not so very far, in the Queen Charlotte Islands, there lived a young chief and his beautiful bride, who he loved so very much. But soon after their wedding, the bride, with cheeks as red as salmon and hair as dark as the deepest parts of the ocean, became ill and took to her bed. And her eyes, which were deep and reflective and wise as Raven herself, glazed over with pain and surrender. The chief, terrified, sent out his very best canoes to summon the shamans from all the surrounding islands, and they came and administered their help and their healing and their herbs and their prayers, but alas, it was to no avail. And on one dark, moonless night, the Great Spirit came and sat on her chest and gathered up the last bits of her breath and took her across the Owl's Bridge to the next place. Well, the chief, after her death, was in horrible pain. And he immediately set out to all the surrounding islands, trying to get a wood carver to make a perfect likeness of his wife, for he needed her with him. And with each one, he would sit and very painstakingly go through, describing the curve of her back, or the way her eyelashes looked in a snowstorm, the way she laughed, the way she had little freckles across her nose. He would tell her stories, like when she caught a fish with her bare hands and let it go. And he also told them how he felt when he was with her. And one by one, each of them carved a likeness of her and revealed it. And he stood and looked and was profoundly disappointed, for none of them even came close to catching the image of his wife. And bereft and saddened and full of pain, he returned home to his own island and took to his own bed, where he became almost like an animal, unable to bathe or take care of even the smallest things. And the people of the town were worried, and they came around him, but they couldn't help. Until one day, a humble woodcarver from his own village came and sat by his side and said, "Chief, your sorrow sorrows me. And you have gone from place to place looking for someone who could recreate the image of your wife. But here's the thing, I have seen your wife, and I have seen you with your wife. And if it would please you, I would love to try to make a likeness of her." Well, the chief had very little hope at this point, but he thought it would do no harm. And he commissioned a big block of redwood to be brought from the mainland, because at that point they had no redwood trees on the Queen Charlotte Islands. And the humble carver took the block home and went to work. And every day he sat prayerfully beside that block of wood, and he thought about the chief's wife. And he thought about her eyelashes and the curve of her back and the darkness of her hair and the depth of her eyes. And she thought about her laugh and how the chief felt when he was with her. And piece by piece, he carved her out until the day came when he called the chief and his brothers around and he unveiled the statue. And there, standing before the chief, was a perfect likeness of his beloved lost wife. And he felt that at some level she had returned to him. And she pulled the statue home, and he put it in the center of his hearth in his home. And there he dressed it in his wife's clothing, particularly in a robe that she loved that had embroidered seabirds all over the sleeves. And he fed the statue little bits of nuts and seeds and whale blubber. And most importantly, he sat quietly and prayerfully and companionably beside her, and he talked to her about his day, about his decisions, about how much he loved her. But still, on those anniversaries, on those dark, moonless nights, the pain would get to him again. Because even though she was there, she wasn't really there. And he would cry. He would find himself around the base of that statue, hugging the bottom. And he would cry, sort of that cry of a man who is knowing deep, deep pain. Hi-ya, hi-ya. Hi-ya, hi-ya. As if his song could reach her across the Owl's Bridge. And sometimes when he would awake, he would find himself curled around the bottom of that statue, the base of which stained a dark color of red from the saltwater truth of his tears. And he sat like this with her day after day and month after month, until one day he thought he saw the statue move. And he called everyone to see, she's coming alive, she's coming back to me. And it wouldn't move, but it seemed something was happening with his statue. And one day when he was sitting beside it talking to her, just about the day, nothing special, he heard a groan deep within the wood. And it was the sort of groan that one would do if one was very, very unwell. And he realized that she wasn't happy standing there. And so he got his brothers and his cousins, and he said, we must move her. She's not happy. And so each of them got around the base, which was now very, very heavy. And they pried and they pulled and they tugged, and they finally started moving it inch by inch, and all at once an enormous crack up the front of it, and the whole thing fell into pieces on the floor of the chief's hearth. And there, underneath the statue, grew a small red cedar tree. And that red cedar tree grew and grew and grew and grew, being watered generously by the saltwater truth of the chief's tears. And to this day, when people visit the Queen Charlotte's Islands and they see these great, beautiful redwood trees all around, they say, ah, that one, that must be the chief's wife's baby. For she was beautiful, and his love for her was beautiful, and their beauty begot more and more and more beauty. And now the chief no longer needs the statue. He no longer needs that physical image, because she comes to him in his dreams, and it is there that they have marvelous conversations.
Okay, we're going to, thank you. We're going to do some great breakout groups, and we'll have 2 to 3 in a group. And again, what we're doing is just, if there's any moment in the story that really stood out for you, or that you are relating to grief in general or your own life, you'll have about 7 minutes. And then we'll bring you back. We'll do a little bit of a share out, and then we'll talk about the implications. I thought maybe we would just kind of share some highlights, and then I'm going to get back to the slideshow. But Any summaries of sort of things that came out, how this relates to grief or how it relates to your lives, or even other topics that came up during your breakout rooms? And feel free to just jump in and unmute yourself.
It was interesting in our group that people spoke about the physical reminders of grief, and that they were perhaps going to release that dependence on that physical.
So kind of the move from the physical back to the abstract.
Right. I thought that was interesting.
Okay.
And then Lori shared something like, I loved it, a DFO, divine flash observation. No. Oh, divine flash of the obvious. That was great.
What does that mean, Lori? Can you tell us?
Well, we were talking about the hanging on to the physical manifestations, things we've acquired from those who have passed. And then in the story, moving from the statue breaking apart to the living tree was like, oh, the divine flash of the obvious. We don't have to hang on to these vestiges, these things that belong to our friends, but, plant a tree or just remember their song. Or I said, being at the Truckee River, remembering our times together. I mean, that's what's most important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, DFO.
Mm-hmm. So it is interesting in the story how he loses her and she's in the abstract, and he needs to bring her back to the physical through the statue first, and he needs to tell her story before he can actually release her back to the abstract. So it's this wonderful interplay between the physical and the spiritual, or the imaginative, and he's kind of learning that play back and forth, which I think is something we all face in grief. Other things that came up for you in your group? I'm going to bring us back to.
I was going to add. I'm sorry, I couldn't find my buttons. I just wanted to say something. Our group. I'm sorry, I interrupted. Our group talked about how COVID gave us another piece of grieving, which I thought was very, very pertinent. In other words, not only are we losing people, but we're being kept from following through with saying goodbye, because we're not allowed to go see someone who is passing, or we're not allowed to be in the hospital room. And I don't know where that fits into the myth that you told, but I just thought that was a really interesting observation, that that the grieving process has been given almost another step.
Mm-hmm. And I think that relates to what we're talking about.
Sorry for barging in.
Oh, no, I'm glad you spoke. Yeah, because when we're hurting the most, what we most need is people. And so we're even stripped of those most basic sort of rituals that carry us through difficult times. And you see these videos of these nurses, bless their hearts, trying to play music or use their iPad to zoom in family to do the best they can. But it's, we're being stripped of those most basic things we need to have some closure and move and have a container for our grief. So I absolutely agree with you. And if you have other things or Monica, did you want to speak?
Well, yeah, that kind of led into something that Scott mentioned about, is there a healthy and an unhealthy way of grieving? And just as I think it was Christine who just said that there's things that we can no longer do, then where does that take us, and how does that evolve the essence of how we're going to grieve, or where we're going to go from this point?
Mm-hmm.
It's just how healthy are we grieving in ways where we can't say goodbye, and so maybe we go to this darker place, or maybe we come up with new things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, new rituals or new ways of holding space for each other. But I agree. I mean, there is no one way through grief, and it's as unique as your relationship with that person. And so finding unusual ways to honor the deceased is a really beautiful way through. And I'm actually going to be talking about that here in the last few minutes of this presentation.
So Kim, we do have a question in the chat that says, what happens if there's an absence of grief? What is that?
Grief. It there's a lot of different answers, and it depends on each person. So sometimes it's about repression and not feeling anything because it's safer. But it also can be that you're very spiritually tuned and you have a rhythm of life and death, and you're able to accept those things more. So I would really need to know more about what was happening for that person and what their background was, because there's really no single answer to that. But most of us have it expressed in some ways that don't seem consistent with grief. Like the slide I showed in the beginning of, do you all of a sudden having some memory problems or some difficulty making really basic decisions, or you feel this kind of low sense of fatigue all the time? There's lots of ways that it can show up that don't look like your classic signs of grief. So hopefully that helps. But let me get back to the slideshow and make sure I leave enough time for my ending stories. So we just did the pair share. So according to this story, first thing we have to do is name it. But what I love about this story is the honoring the uniqueness of your loss. So let's go through some of the pieces of the story. He described the curve of her back and the way her eyes crinkled when she was laughing. And isn't it amazing how when we're in deep pain, we really need someone to see and know the particular soulfulness of what it is that we've lost. And that really helps that witnessing and the validation. And it's interesting because first he looks outside of himself, right? He's going from island to island, trying to find someone who can carve the likeness of his wife. And of course, they haven't seen her, so they can't do it. And then he finally comes back to his own home and someone who has seen her and seen him with her. And so there is something about being seen, being known, and being loved all at once that is very, very healing. He also gives himself permission to feel. You notice in the story, no one shows up and says, wow, Chief, you got to get on with your life. You're not even bathing. You are laying in bed. We need you. You're not making decisions. It's very organic, his process. And there are those moments where it says, and he cried the tears of a man who had known great pain. And there is that reference even to the saltwater truth of his tears. The other part is self-care. And this can be physical, mental, emotional, social, or spiritual. And I know that a lot of people talk about mindfulness or meditation or yoga, and those are pretty common things, but those are not for everybody. Sometimes taking care of yourself is playing online Scrabble with friends, or going for a walk in the woods, or hitting golf balls at the driving range, or going to a racquetball court and hitting a ball as hard as you can. So identifying what those self-care strategies are is really helpful. If you could just throw in the chat really quickly some of the things, maybe unusual things that you do for self-care. Drive into the desert, soak in a tub and eat chocolate, writing and rock and roll, walking the dog, reminding myself it's okay to feel, to be upset, singing, talking with family, connecting with my sister when I can. That's my brother, by the way, who's saying that. Played slots, interesting. And I think it's important to come up with your own unique way of taking care of yourself. Obviously, if needed, and if you're not doing it well on your own, reaching out for help. I just pulled this from the Sierra College webpage, but there are a lot of resources. As a Sierra College student, you can even get free counseling. I know a lot of employers do that as well. But this is the part that I'm really interested in for this story. And it's like Lori said, isn't it amazing that it moves from a stagnant block of wood to a living, growing tree? And there's that moment when it cracks open, and there beneath the statue, a small red cedar sapling grew. And so obviously, metaphorically, this can mean so many things. When he actually realized she was unwell, he called together his brothers and his cousins to move the statue. And as he gives her permission to move, he also unconsciously gives himself permission to move. And something is co-created out of that movement. I've worked with a lot of people on this part of it. There was a woman from Chicago who her husband died after 57 years, and she felt very alone and bereft without him. And everywhere she went, she found single gloves, and she started collecting those single gloves and stuffing them in the drawers. And pretty soon the drawers were overflowing. And she took them out finally and took up her husband's old ladder, and she hung them by a fishing line in the tree outside their house. And she said that when the wind blows, it's like they're waving goodbye and waving hello. And of course, the single glove, being useless without its mate, she had this real connection to that idea. I worked with another woman whose son died by suicide, and she had collected all the jeans, like from when he was a little boy, and she made a quilt out of the jeans. And it was so sweet because you could actually see the little knee marks in some of the jeans. And this quilt, she would pull it around her, and she would talk to her son who was no longer there. And there's also the story of a man in Reno whose son died in a quad accident. He was a musician. He was also a carpenter. They got to the place of organ donation, and he had a really hard time thinking about letting go of his son's heart. So he hooked up a recorder to a stethoscope and recorded his son's heartbeat. And then he actually composed 28 different music pieces to the sound of his son's heartbeat. And he plays them while he's working, and he feels like his son's heart and soul is with him. And I want to share one more example. And this is a really special one because the person who I'm talking about right now is actually here in community with us. Charlie, if you want to give a wave out. I want to tell you a little bit about Charlie's story. I actually have never met Charlie in person, but we connected online through our class last semester. So he did the same assignment about drawing something that was related to grief. Well, his background story is that his beloved daughter was 10 years old. Her name is Anna Marie, and she drowned in a tragic accident when she was only 10 years old. And he was rightfully haunted by that experience. And at one point, he went to a therapist who instructed him to burn all of the images and belongings and clothing that he had of her so that he could move on with his life. And which is shocking to me, but he then spent many, many years regretting that and having horrible nightmares about her drowning and calling out and wanting him to be there, and that he was unable to respond. Well, I want to show you the picture he drew. So he drew this from memory of his daughter. And this picture just gives me chills. He drew it, as I said, from memory. And as he draws it, he's taking the abstract of his feelings and he's putting them into this picture. But he's also recreating her. He's taking her from the imaginal to the concrete. And in doing so, he's actually giving himself permission to move, and he's giving her permission to move, just like the statue. And so this picture became a symbol, and it became an invisible lifeline through which he could still love and still connect to her. And miraculously, he told me yesterday that his nightmares stopped after he drew this picture. and he now has a physical representation of his beloved daughter. So thank you, Charlie, so much for letting me share that story. The end of the story is their beauty begot more and more beauty. And the chief no longer needed the statue because she visited him in his dreams. So I would say that though the gravesite may be a place where we have to say goodbye in the physical, it is also a place we are invited to say hello in the imaginal. We are asked to create the integrities, or angels, if you will, that will carry us through and allow us to keep loving, because we obviously don't stop loving. I want to leave you with an image of my book. If you enjoy the folktale and their uses with cases and how to have creative outcomes for grief, this is what it looks like. It's available on Amazon. And I know I'm right at the end of my time here, and I'm just going to end us with a little bit of silence and a singing bowl. And just get yourself quiet for a moment. I honor all your losses, and also a huge shout out. Can you give a wave, Charlie? You're the star of my show here today, and I appreciate you letting me share your picture. So that concludes our presentation for today, and I appreciate you joining me.